On today's guest, it is me, Guru Nishan. And I decided to, I've been thinking about being a guest on my own podcast here because I have a 3HO story, of course, because I was born and raised here. And I was thinking about having somebody interview me, but then I got several emails saying, when are you going to tell your story? And one graceful woman here reached out and just said, I want you to look in the camera and I want you to tell your story. So I said, okay. So here I am. I'm going to read a little bit about my bio so you have a sense of the story I'm going to tell, and then I will go into it. So Guru Nishan Kaur Khalsa was born and raised in the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community in 1977 in the Phoenix, Arizona area, navigating a challenging early childhood with lots of chaotic changes, including her mother leaving the Dharma in 1978, custody battles, and despicable communication between fighting parents, among other things. She grew up resilient, feisty, and full of positivity to give to the world that she thought was the power of her light, rather than recognizing these symptoms as deeply rooted trauma patterns. At age 19, she lived and worked in the Johannesburg, South Africa 3HO ashram, and later in the Herndon, Virginia ashram as well, with interesting stories that we'll talk about today. After experiencing burnout in her decade-long sales wellness business career, she took Kundalini Yoga teacher training with Krishnakar in Los Angeles in 2009 to get back to her center and heal. She had zero interest at this point at being a Kundalini Yoga teacher or making money doing this. After the final collapse and eerily familiar demise of her business enterprise in 2012, she began to teach Kundalini Yoga in Chicago as a way to move through her grief, confusion, fear, and vitriol that was surfacing. Slowly, and many, many years later, she began to recognize trauma patterns of emotional withholding, emotional bypassing, whitewashing positivity, and other symptoms that her body was communicating as standard operation. And I began to recognize how Kundalini Yoga was actually holding her body captive and not opening it up into freedom and space. It would take several more years and many more sexual embodiment practices before she could recognize her almost constant disassociation from her body as a shame-based self-image disguised as perfected projection and bright light energy as her outward persona. For several years, she stopped teaching and practicing Kundalini Yoga entirely, except at the European Yoga Festival in 2016, 2017, 2018. And she was oscillating between her love of Kundalini Yoga and her vitriol for aspects of the teachings that felt false, riddled with corruption. In March 2020, she finally experienced total liberation, or what felt like that. And it felt like an unhooking from her crown, her 10th gate, to finally see and hear publicly what her body had been communicating to her loudly for the last 8 years, but her mind could not accept. Lies, deceit, sadistic predatory abuse, and manipulation were at the heart of her conscious community upbringing. So I am excited to share this testimony. It is obviously strange to write your own bio and to do your own interview on a podcast, but I'm going to do the best I can to share my story, my 3HO story, which, includes the beginning of my life and several years into that, and then a large segment of it not, and then later years again. And what's interesting is that the segment where I, quote, wasn't involved in the Dharma illuminated a lot of cult patterns that I've been able to grow and learn from and realize that it was me repeating trauma patterns that I had no idea about. So I'm going to do the best I can to just brush over large segments of my life, and you'll be able to get that in my future writings and other podcasts that I'm going to be doing and sharing about myself. But I really want to keep this episode specifically to the uncomfortable conversations of being a part of 3HO, because that is the unfoldment of my life